Morning. Good morning. Good morning, ghouls and fiends. I had to check the time there. It's light outside. This is a rarity for the show. But yeah, good morning, ghouls and fiends. I am your host, Tez. Welcome to another edition of the Ministry of Horror. So, quite a lot has changed or developed in the last few days since the last show. We did a live show on Twitch, twitch.tv/Tezis, and had a lot of fun. We really have kind of got this watch-along system nailed. And that was something that I'd always missed from Twitch, was the watch parties, the watch-alongs. I kind of felt like that was a lot of the main reason for me for doing Twitch, because I'm not like a hardcore video gamer. But since doing that, a few things have developed. So, not a new development, but I'm getting married this year. And we're kind of focusing on, well, what can we do to increase our wedding honeymoon budget pot as much as possible. My fiance has been doing her own business, which is doing very well. I'm now helping out with that. I have my bookkeeping business, which I've also then lent into developing spreadsheets, which you can buy through Etsy. Cheap, shameless plug there. Can't remember what the link is, but it's the seller is T.S. Eliot Bookkeeping. So if you want to buy a spreadsheet, you can go there and do it for budgeting. But also, how I can use my love of horror to potentially help the wedding budget. Now, with Twitch, if I stream more often, then that earns a few beans, and every bean counts. A few pennies, few cents. Every cent counts, right? Every dollar counts. Pound. But also, I just enjoy it again. I've just kind of found myself having a good time streaming, which I haven't really, in terms of, let's say, video game streaming, I haven't had that for a very long time. We finished Space Marine 2 this week, the campaign, and also finally jumped back into Dead Space, which we hadn't played. Well, I hadn't played since we last streamed it, like in 2023. And it's been a hell of a lot of fun. It really has. And then I've kind of looked into, well, what other things can I do in terms of with Ministry of Horror? And yeah, we are now on Patreon. So if you are listening to this on Saturday, the 25th of January, congratulations, you are a Patreon member. Thank you. We have now a channel, patreon.com Ministry of Horror. It's got all our social links on there, and we've got a number of different membership tiers. Now, what I would say is, obviously times are tough, and if you do want to just support the channel, but you're unable to do that financially, which is completely understandable, there is you can follow the channel as a free member, and that just helps grow the channel's visibility on the Patreon platform. So be sure to head to patreon.com/Ministry of Horror and at least follow the page or become a free member, because it does help in its own way. So, here we go. I have to talk about the tiers. The tiers are going to be updating, as this is all very, very new, but we have a $5 a month tier. And that is, help buy me a cup of coffee. I do enjoy my coffee, and if you can spare $5 a month and you want to buy me a coffee, much appreciated. We have a $12 a month membership level called the Ghoul level, where you get the latest Ministry of Horror podcast 48 hours before it goes onto podcast platforms and YouTube. So it's a 48-hour exclusivity on the podcast. Fiend level is $25 a month, and that gets you a shout out on the show. You also get, obviously, everything with the prior level, along with a request for a review. Now, I am going to be doing a blog, do some more writing on here. You'll get the writing on all the levels. And then I've also spoken to my fiancée Victoria about her doing a review or an first impressions of a film to get her insight, because she does like horror, but she's not a big horror fan. And I think it's going to be interesting to hear her views on certain films. Now, I'm a huge David Lynch fan, and I know that she may not like or understand, and I don't understand, but may not quite get the gist or the vibe at all of David Lynch. So I figured we're going to show her Mulholland Drive, and those reviews, when they do happen, ideally once a month, will go out on that $25 a month Fiend level. And then we've got $100 a month, which is Demonic level, where you get to come on a live stream to talk horror with me. A discussion on your featured presentation of choice. So at the end of the day, there is entirely no pressure. I'm not going to suddenly change the regular Ministry of Horror show. The show itself isn't going to go behind a paywall. It is going to go out slightly earlier, just a couple of days earlier on Patreon. And there is going to be Patreon exclusive new content, because I'm kind of going all in on this. I got to do what I can to make our wedding and honeymoon just the best that it can possibly be. And if you'd like to come along on that journey, then that would be amazing. And we are planning, when we go on the honeymoon, to do shows on the road. So we're going across America. And it is going to culminate in Halloween Horror Nights. So things like that. There may be Patreon exclusive videos there. It may be that there's a highlight on the regular YouTube. I'm not sure yet. This is all very new. It's all very exciting. But I have also, before we kind of get into the show, I've got to plug the Twitch channel. I've had a lot of fun on Twitch this week, and I really do want to get the channel to grow as much as it can do. I obviously kind of put the channel aside when we stopped doing the live show every week and every other week, and started focusing more on recorded shows. Like, it went in that direction. But since that point, I have been having a great time doing these shows. And what I wanted to do was, to help it grow, I want to kind of throw out there the benefits of having a Prime membership. So if you do want to follow the Twitch channel, but you don't watch Twitch, that's fine. But help my follower count grow. If you go to twitch.tv/Tesius, you can just click follow the channel. And if I am doing a live stream and you do want to watch it, then you'll get a notification. You can watch the live stream. But it will help my follower count grow. And subsequently, there are subs. So again, if you wanted to subscribe onto the Twitch, you can. There is even a donate button. So if you just think, oh, he's banging on about his wedding and his honeymoon, I can click donate and send a £1 on PayPal. It all helps, either funding my coffee habit or the wedding. But if you do have a Prime membership, Amazon Prime, you can link your Prime account to your Twitch account. Doesn't cost anything. And then what that does is that not only gives you free games through Twitch, so if you do play video games on your PC, you do get quite a few free games to download, but it also gives you a free Prime subscription. And if you use that on my channel, that again really helps the channel's visibility grow. It puts a few coin in my Twitch pot that eventually pays out, but it costs you nothing. So I would really appreciate ghouls and fiends out there across the world. If you can, head to twitch.tv/Tesius, give the channel a follow, use your Prime if you have it, subscription to subscribe to the channel, and just share it out there. I really want to kind of push the Ministry of Horror to, do as much as it can, really. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a little old podcast that I record to talk about horror, and it's my favourite subject in the world. So there's the shameless plugs out of the way. I won't keep banging on about them probably until the end of the show. So there we go. Now, in terms of the show, I've obviously mentioned what I have been up to in terms of this week's show developments, but I did also get down to the old cinema to watch Wolfman, the new Universal film. There is my, well, there was my initial first impressions on Twitch. So what I am going to try, not Twitch, sorry, God damn it, Patreon. So what I am going to try to do is every time I go to the cinema, usually if I've gone with someone, I'll wait till I've dropped them off so they're not hearing me talk to my phone for a few minutes. But once I drop them off, I will then give you my initial post-cinema reactions. No spoilers, no score, saving the reviews for the show, but just my initial thoughts. I had done it for Wolfman, but because I think my car must have still been connected to the Bluetooth of my phone, and so the video that I recorded had no audio. Probably should have checked it before I uploaded it, but thank you to Patreon member Gruff. And this is the shout-outs for members to the Patreon. We have Gruff and we have Bericles. Thank you very much, guys. Gruff gave me the heads up about that. So I, yesterday morning, recorded a take 2, a slept-on first impressions. So that's on there, but I am going to review that on today's show. And then that leads me to the return of the featured presentation. And we're going to talk about, not to bury the lead, but we're going to talk about some of the horror films where werewolves have been done right. That may give you an indication of where I'm going with my Wolfman score, but we'll get to that when we get to that. Without further ado, ghouls and fiends, it is time for the horror news. This is the news. Oh, oh, oh. That's the news. So, as per usual, all of our horror news comes from good old folks at bloodydisgusting.com. These are the 9 new horror films that have released this past week. This write-up comes from John Squires. So, horror legend Tony Todd leaves behind a handful of roles in horror movies not yet released, and one of the first of his final roles comes courtesy of Werewolf Game, now available on VOD. In Werewolf Game, 12 strangers are kidnapped and forced to play Werewolf Game to the death, a thrilling feature film based on the iconic party game. Sunstrike Pictures tells Bloody Disgusting, we have a huge influence of John Carpenter and horror manga to create a uniquely visceral film that is as haunting as it is beautiful. Werewolf Game is a thrilling, disturbing, whodunit mystery that will keep you on the edge of your seat the entire time. Tony Todd stars alongside familiar faces, including Bei Ling, Robert Picardo, and Lydia Hurst, as well as rising stars Tila Dunn, Tabitha Jane, and Tim Realbuto. Jackie Payne and Cara Claymore directed the film, written by Payne. There's a trailer online. It's funny we're talking about werewolves, and I hadn't even read ahead on this, that the first film mention of a new film is werewolf-related. I haven't heard a lot of buzz about this, and it hasn't. It's not like in the blurb there is a mention of a disgusting review or their impressions on the film. Mentioning that there's a huge influence from old Johnny C is great because I love John Carpenter, but it doesn't always translate to that's going to be the tone that they achieve or are indeed going for. So there we go. Next, succumb to Robert Eggers' Nosferatu from the comfort of your own sarcophagus on digital now, with 4K Ultra HD, Blu-ray and DVD to follow on February 18th via Universal. In addition to the 132-minute theatrical cut, you can sink your fangs into a 136-minute extended cut. A reimagination of F.W. Murnau's 1922 silent horror classic, Nosferatu is a gothic tale of obsession between a haunted young woman and the terrifying vampire infatuated with her, causing untold horror in its wake. Bill Skarsgård stars as Count Orlok with Nicholas Hoult, Lily Rose Depp, Aaron Taylor-Johnson, Emma Corrin and Willem Dafoe. I loved Nosferatu. We gave it a great score in my review. I know there's been some mixture in reviews in the outside world, and that's fine. I do think sometimes people are a bit of a contrarian for the sake of it, but everyone is entitled to their opinion. That's all good. I think visually it was stunning. I thought the performances in it were great. It took some interesting interesting approaches and was a bit shocking in places. All in all, I thought it was great. So I'm interested to definitely get the 4K release, and I'm interested to see what the 4 minutes of additional footage in the extended cut is. Very intrigued. Next up, a mysterious ship crashes midwinter in period chiller The Damned from director Theodor Paulsen, and his psychological chiller is now available on VOD outlets at home. The film originally released in theatres on January 3rd, 2025. Starring Odessa Young and Joe Cole, The Damned is a tense psychological horror film that follows a 19th century widow who is tasked with making an impossible choice when a ship sinks off the coast of her isolated fishing outpost during the middle of an especially cruel winter. With provisions running low, Eva and her close-knit community must choose between rescuing the shipwrecked crew and prioritising their own survival. Facing the consequences of their decision and tormented by guilt, the inhabitants wrestle with the mounting sense of dread and begin to believe they are all being punished for their choices. Siobhan Finneran, Rory McCann, Turlo Conway, Lewis Gribben, Francis McGee, Michael Ochlon, Adrian Sigurdsson, Guillermo Uria, and Arne Mani Jansen Gray also star. A Scandinavian cast in places there. Jamie Harrigan wrote the screenplay based on a story by Theodor Paulsen. I like the sound of this. I'm not familiar with Theodor Paulsen, but I know Rory McCann as the Hound from Game of Thrones. That's probably about it. I've seen Black Mirror, which Lewis Gribben has been in, but there's a lot of Black Mirror. It sounds interesting enough. The idea of this: do we save people who are going to drown and freeze to death, but we don't have much to give them? Difficult choice. Difficult. Next up, the directorial debut of Dread Central's editor-in-chief Mary Beth McAndrews. Epic Pictures genre label Dread released Bystanders is on VOD outlets this past Tuesday. During the film's festival run, the title garnered awards from Nightmares Film Festival and Horror Hound Film Festival. At Horror Hound, it was nominated for 11 awards, winning 7, including Best Feature, Best Directing, Best Writing, Best Supporting Performance, Garrett Murphy, Best Cinematography, Best Editing, and Judge's Choice. Bystanders stars Brandy Botkin, Bob Wilcox, Garrett Murphy, Jamie Alvey, Chanae Morrow, and Hannah Fierman. Jamie Avery also serves as the film's writer. In the film, Claire and Gray are your typical loving millennial couple navigating a jaded world. Abby is a sweet, awkward teen. When Abby attends a party held by her crush, a rich frat boy hotshot named Cody, the bash spins out of control when Cody and the boys decide to drug, rape, and hunt several of the girls in attendance. When Abby's path intersects with Gray and Claire's path, they form an unlikely alliance during a night of chaos and bloodshed as the trio fight for their lives against the collegiate creeps. That sounds like that could actually be pretty good. We don't get that many Dread Central releases in the UK. They do sometimes hit Prime, but in terms of being available on streaming platforms without having to, obviously pay, then we don't see them that often. And the ones I have seen are quite a mixed bag. But the setup for that does sound interesting enough that I would give it a watch. Next, compared to Coralie Farget's The Substance and the wild works of Takeshi Miike, don't know how you pronounce the surname, by Daniel Kerdland is in his recent review for Bloody Disgusting. Sasha Rainbow's feature debut, Grafted, promises a malicious cosmetic cocktail of body horror with squelching sounds to enhance the horror. Beginning today, it's now streaming exclusively on Shudder. The body horror movie stars Joanna Sun, Jess Hong, and Jared Turner. It was written by Mia Maromawa, Hurling Oh, and Lee Murray, as well as Sasha Rainbow. Chinese scholarship student Wei travels to New Zealand to study medical research at a prestigious university. Shy, introverted, and hiding a genetic facial birthmark, Wei is shunned by her social butterfly cousin Angela and her glamorous friends. Determined to change her fate, Wei immerses herself in her late father's research, working on a revolutionary skin grafting procedure that could cure her deformity. As her experiments take a dark turn, she becomes more dangerous and unhinged, willing to eliminate anyone who threatens her secret. I think that sounds pretty badass. I'm going to have a quick look if if Chrome will catch up with me, if that's available on Shudder in the UK, because me like the sound of that. Certainly. Okay, come on, Internet Explorer. What are you doing? Not Internet Explorer, Chrome. Okay, family dinner, the witches, righteous hypochondriac, invoking yell, grafted. Grafted is on here. What language is it in? Audio is in English. Okay. Just so I know if I have to preempt that I've got to read subtitles and get into the headspace. But I don't. So that's good. Next, Jaws star Richard Dreyfuss heads back into shark-infested waters in Into the Deep, this time with Halloween star Scout Taylor Compton in the lead. It's now available on VOD. Into the Deep features modern-day pirates on the hunt for sunken drugs who kidnap a boat of tourists and force them to dive into shark-infested waters to retrieve the contraband. Christian Sesma directs from a script by Chad Law and Josh Ridgway, who co-wrote Sesma's 2022 action thriller Section 8. The film stars Callum McGowan, Scout Taylor Compton and John Cedar, with Stuart Townsend and Richard Dreyfuss also appearing. Into the Deep has been rated R for bloody violence and language. Now, me and Victoria do enjoy a shark attack film. She's a big animal attack film fan. So when I described to her an 80s film called Alligator, she was like, "What? We have to watch that." But we have watched some stinkers when it comes to shark attack films, ones which I've reviewed on this show. I'm sure she will be into this, and also the fact it's got Richard Dreyfuss in it. That casting connection alone will have her interested, so I'll make a note of that. Next up. A family moves into a suburban house and becomes convinced they're not alone in Steven Soderbergh's Presence, a horror film that's uniquely told from the perspective of the ghost. Neon released Presence in theatres beginning January 24th. In the film, a family moves into a suburban house and becomes convinced they are not alone. A supernatural force has infiltrated the house and taken a specific interest in the couple's daughter. I have heard some pretty dull responses to this film. I've seen the trailer and it looks like, okay, it could be creepy. There could be some intrigue and some suspense, or it could be a bit pretentious and dull, potentially. I'm not gonna be rushing to the cinema to watch this. I do enjoy watching a horror at the cinema, as we all know, but this one, probably going to wait till it hits streaming at home. Reviews of it do seem to have been fairly mixed. I mean, it's innovative, cool, but it's not really hit with me in terms of the interest levels. Next, stoner comedy meets undead apocalypse on Christmas in the new indie zombie movie Zombie Strain, which blazed onto digital from Dark Sky Films beginning January 24th. Michael Seabolt makes his feature directorial debut with Zombie Strain. During the zombie apocalypse, survivors trapped in the soundstage make an astonishing discovery about a potent strain of marijuana. As they struggle to survive, tensions rise and mistakes occur. They begin to question who is more dangerous, the relentless undead outside or the growing mistrust among themselves. In their fight for survival, the true threat may lie within. Zombie films are kind of... It's difficult these days to make a zombie film that stands out. You almost have to have awesome gore or great set pieces, or go for a really mature approach with the story. We and I suppose in a year when we are getting 28 years later, which, yes, it's not zombies, it's a rage virus, blah, 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 blah. It's going to be difficult to stand out and keep your head above the rest of the zombie dirge. Dark Sky Films, mixed bag on their releases that I've seen, but this it sounds more like it's going to go down a potentially comedy route. It's not mentioned. Well, it's mentioned as a stoner comedy, but am I going to be rushing to watch this one? No, I doubt we're going to get a UK cinema released, to be honest. And then finally for the new films, dark secrets and family tension unfold in the Sandcastle, now streaming on Netflix. In the mystery thriller, Yasmin and her husband Nabil find themselves stranded on an idyllic island with their 2 children, Adam and Jana. Cut off from the outside world and unable to signal for help, their hopes for rescue dwindle with each passing day. Beneath the surface of their struggles lie a secret that Yasmin and Nabil fight to keep from Jana, the youngest. But as time passes, the cracks in the facade grow deeper. As the family faces mounting tension and countless disappointments, the bond holding them together are pushed to their breaking point. Directed by Emmy-nominated Matty Brown, The Sandcastle is described by the streamer as a gripping exploration of family, fear, and resilience in the face of the unimaginable. Doesn't really sound that horror-esque. It might... psychological horror, psychological thriller maybe, sure. But... a family stranded on a bit of land. I mean, it says mystery thriller, so there's got to be some things there, and there's this element of a secret that they're keeping from their youngest could be interesting. Again, no, it says, you know, the blurb here isn't gripping me, so not that much on the new releases that I am that hyped for, which is a shame, but. You know, these things happen. We'll next move on to something I am hyped for. The Monkey just broke a massive trailer viewership record for indie horror. Write-ups from John Squires. Just 6 months after Neon's Longlegs became the highest-grossing indie horror movie in the past 10 years, the distributor continues to dominate the indie horror space by breaking another massive record with their next offering. Again directed by Osgood Perkins, the trailer for upcoming Stephen King adaptation The Monkey just passed 109 million views. Deadline explains the first trailer for Osgood Perkins' The Monkey is quite the success, with the current running viewership across all platforms, including TikTok, of 109 million. Within the first 24 hours, the trailer for The Monkey passed 43 million views and hit 100 million in the first 72, which Deadline says is arguably the record for a non-MPA studio independent horror movie. Deadline adds for further context, among other horror trailers that count TikTok views, The Monkey beats such picks as Smile, which netted 100 million views opening, 22.6 million opening, The Black Phone at 73 million for its first trailer and 37 million for its second trailer, and Talk to Me's second trailer, which came in at 23 million. The Monkey also beat out both first and second trailers for Nosferatu at 74 million and 48 million respectively. It sounds like Neon may have another horror hit on their hands here in early 2025. Produced by James Wan, The Monkey arrives in theatres on February 21st. In The Monkey, when twin brothers find a mysterious wind-up monkey, a series of outrageous deaths tear their family apart. 25 years later, the monkey begins a new killing spree, forcing the estranged brothers to confront the cursed toy. The Monkey is a short horror story that appeared in King's Skeleton Crew, a 1985 collection that also featured The Mist, The Jaunt, which is terrifying, The Raft, which is... The Raft's pretty good. It's much better than the segment from Creepshow 2. Survivor Type, and The Reach, plus many more. Yeah, I mean, Skeleton Crew is probably one of my favourite King short story collections. It's got some really great segments in there. And I mean, I'm a fan so far of what I've seen of Osgood Perkins, which is Longlegs. And the trailer for this looks interesting, and it's a creepy ass story. I'm sure it's gonna nail it. I've got faith. So I'm very hyped to watch Monkey, which comes out next month. Very hyped. Next up, Cineverse saves the Toxic Avenger remake with an unrated theatrical release later this year. Brad Mischka writes, "We're excited to announce today that Cineverse has saved director Macon Blair's The Toxic Avenger remake and plans an unrated wide theatrical release later this year." Blood Disgusting's parent company Cineverse acquired all US and Canadian theatrical, home, entertainment, and streaming rights through a deal with the Legendary Entertainment. This fresh take on the beloved anti-hero known as Toxie was directed by Macon Blair, I don't feel at home in this world anymore, and stars Emmy and Golden Globe winner Peter Dinklage, Kevin Bacon, and Elijah Wood. In this bold new chapter of the classic midnight movie franchise created by Lord Kaufman and Troma Entertainment, a shocking accident transforms downtrodden janitor Winston Goose into a mutant vigilante. Armed with his signature mop, the unlikely hero battles freaks, gangsters, and corrupt CEOs while trying to save his relationship with his son. The story channels the subversive gonzo energy of the original Toxic Avenger while delivering a fresh contemporary twist. The film features an all-star cast that also includes Jacob Tremblay, Julia Davis, and Taylor Page. Yeah, it's been weird with this film that you got such a great cast. The images that were released a little while ago looked really interesting, and then it was just shelved. No plans on releasing it. One of those films where it's like, okay, was this like a tax cut situation, like Batgirl, or did they then view it and think, Jesus Christ, we can't release this? And I think it may well have been the latter. But the fact that it is now getting a release, it does build the intrigue. Like I remember as a kid Toxic Avenger from the Toxic Crusaders, the like cartoon series. And then only a year or so ago, we watched the Toxic Avenger on stream, and I hated it. I didn't like it. I'm not that familiar with a lot of trauma properties, but it's not really my thing. I have to be honest. But I'm interested to watch this. Like Elijah Wood looks mental in the image that's been shown, and I like Peter Dinklage, so I'm down with that. Next in the news, Barbarian director Zach Cregger is writing and directing the next Resident Evil movie. John Squires writes, after 7 live-action movies and a short-lived Netflix TV series, The Hollywood Reporter informs us tonight that Constantine Film and PlayStation Productions are bringing the Resident Evil video game saga back to the big screen. Zach Cregger is attached to write and direct the new movie, with several studios engaged in a bidding war for the project. The Hollywood Reporter's Boris Kitt notes in tonight's exclusive report, 4 studios are elbowing for the win, among them Warner Bros. And Netflix, according to sources. Zach Cregger's Resident Evil is said to take the title back to its horror roots and be more faithful to the initial games, which is something we have certainly heard before. The most recent installment in the franchise, director Johan Roberts' Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City, took a similar approach back in 2021, but ultimately failed to resonate with fans. It came in the wake of 6 movies starring Mila Jovovich, which collectively surpassed $1 billion at the box office by embracing an action-heavy approach to the material. More recently, the Netflix series Resident Evil ran for just 1 season before being axed by the streamer, premiering in July 2022 to mixed reviews before being cancelled in August. I think with this, you've just got to take it to the Spencer Mansion. They really just need to go, okay, look, where we take the approach of going action heavy, you know, yes, that seemed to appeal to the popcorn eating audience, but it was a bit too flashy, no substance for me. I watched the first 2 or 3 films. I watched the first 2 and was like, okay. And then I watched the third one, thought this is just wank, and I never continued with those. The other end of the spectrum is Welcome to Raccoon City, where, yes, they tried to go, okay, let's have characters that look like the video game characters, and let's try and set the story in that world. And I did enjoy it for the most part. I thought it was fun in places, but it felt like a very fan service heavy film where let's just try and fit in the things that people recognize without focusing too much on building terror, building a cohesive story. Also making Leon a bumbling idiot. I kind of feel that if you're going to do Resident Evil and you're going to bring it back to its horror roots, Jill Valentine, Chris Redfield, Spencer Mansion, build on that waking dread there instead of what we've had so far. Like, don't focus on over-the-top nonsense. Give us the creepy, slow zombies. Give us the tyrant, where it's not just overly over the top. Give us the giant spiders, the giant snake. You know, those sorts of things. Like, just take it back to the Spencer Mansion. Let's just actually do the first game. And if we can nail the first game, then let's enter Raccoon City proper. That's how I feel that they should do it. Because I just think that, like, there's enough atmosphere and ambience and terror in that first game. And the first game isn't even my favourite. Like, I think Resident Evil 2 or Code Veronica are my favourites. But then even latter, I really enjoyed 4, really enjoyed. Not so much 7. I thought 7 was great, but it was just a bit too gloopy. Everything looked the same. I'm not really a fan of the gloop monsters. But I really enjoyed 8, Village. I thought it was a nice balanced mixture of the game. And we had Lady Dimitrescu. So that's what I would hope. And I've got faith. I think Barbarian showcased a director with a lot of talent. So hopefully we tap into that, because it's a good opportunity. And then finally, in the horror news, Cinderella body horror movie The Ugly Stepsister made someone vomit at Sundance. John Squires writes, "It's always a sign of a good horror movie when it's making audiences squirm and even vomit in their seats, and this year's first horror movie to meet those high standards has already been unleashed upon the world. It's titled The Ugly Stepsister, a body horror twist on the classic Cinderella fairy tale that just premiered at Sundance last night." According to Variety, according to a report, I should say, from Variety that details the sights and sounds of Sundance's opening night, it was also clear that Sundance still favours the bold and doesn't shy away from screening films that may elicit strong reactions. During the premiere of the opening Sundance midnight movie, The Ugly Stepsister, a moviegoer leaned over into the aisle and vomited. The outlet details the vomitous content. Emily Blishford's body horror film includes several difficult-to-watch scenes of crude cosmetic surgery, including its protagonist eating a tapeworm, sewing in eyelashes, and enduring a barbaric rhinoplasty. But is there any truth to this report, or is it little more than movie marketing? Megan Navarro tweeted, "My review for The Ugly Stepsister, a gnarly body horror twist on Cinderella, is now live on @BloodyDisgusting. In short, I loved it, but it's not at all for the squeamish," she adds. Okay, I mean, I wondered if maybe for a midnight screening someone had been drinking too much or had eaten something that made them a bit squiffy, perhaps. But, I mean, if a film shows barbaric surgery, then, I don't know, things like that where it's a little bit too real in appearance probably make me lose my lunch or get close to it. So, I'm interested. I mean, yes, there is this current stigma with let's take an old property and do a horror twist on it, which is sort of being done to death at the moment. But if this is getting a strong reaction at Sundance, there's potential there, because I can't see Blood and Honey, Winnie the Pooh being played at Sundance. So I'll keep an eye on The Ugly Stepsister. And that is it for the horror news. That was the news. Oh, 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 oh. And it's now time that we take a little trip to the review area. So, this week's review, we've only got the one review, is the 2025 American psychological body horror Wolf Man, directed by Lee Whannell, from a screenplay he co-wrote with Corbett Tuck. It's a reboot of The Wolf Man from 1941. This film stars Christopher Abbott, Julia Garner, and Sam Yeager. The plot follows a family man seeking to protect his wife and daughter from a werewolf, only to become infected and slowly transform into the creature. Jason Blum produces alongside his Blumhouse Productions banner. Okie dokie. So, as with all of our horror reviews on Ministry of Horror, I will talk a little bit about the plot of the film. I'll go into some of the highs, some of the lows. I'll give you a score out of 10. Now, okay, let's just go into the plot on this. So, 1995. A hiker's vanishing in the remote mountains of Oregon sparks speculation about a virus linked to the region's wildlife. During a hunting trip in the area, a young Blake Lovell and his stern father Grady spot a mysterious humanoid creature lurking in the forest and hide in an elevated hunting blind. 30 years later, Blake lives in San Francisco with his daughter Ginger and workaholic wife Charlotte. Like his now estranged father, he struggles to control his temper, causing a strain on his marriage. One day he receives a death certificate for Grady, who went missing, and the keys to his childhood home. He decides to vacation there in an attempt to repair his relationship with Charlotte. Seeking directions, they encounter a local, Derek, who leads them to the house as the sun sets. Before they arrive, a creature drives them off the road, scratching Blake's arm and dragging Derek away. Okay, and that is the setup for the film. So in terms of werewolves, it's not a typical lycanthropic tale. It's not the typical being out on the moors at night, and getting bitten or scratched by a werewolf, then leading you to, in the next full moon, transform into a massive hairy wolf, and then the following morning you wake up back as a regular human. It doesn't go through that course of actions. Instead, with this, there's more of a mention of a potential disease in the region, in the wildlife, which has this tribalistic term related to it. And the translation of that is man with the wolf's face, or something along those lines. Paraphrasing a bit here because I can't remember the exact blurb at the start of the film. So it's not your typical werewolf film. It is a wolf man, but it's not what you'd expect from a wolf man. I think the performances in this are generally okay. They're generally pretty good. No one is particularly bad. I think Christopher Abbott does a fairly good job of being the father struggling with his own relationship with his father and how that's impacting him today with his daughter, because he does have these moments where he is essentially imitating his father. Julie Garner, I think her acting in this is fine, but it's the story beats that go through it where you just sort of feel, was there maybe a fair amount of cutting in this film? Because it establishes early on there's this issue in her relationship with her daughter, where her daughter's very much a mummy's girl, a daddy's girl, I should say. Very close relationship with the dad. But it's not like it's established that she just doesn't talk to her mum or her mum doesn't talk to her. It doesn't come off in that way, but that appears to be what they're going for in terms of a story beat of her saying at one point that, you know, I don't know how to be there for her. So it does feel as a bit of a missed opportunity when later on the shit hits the fan. It's a very dark film visually, and I also think that it doesn't look that great. Like, it is quite grainy. I would have expected there to be a little bit kind of more polished to it. It's not like it's going for a low budget look, and it doesn't necessarily look low budget, but a lot of it is in darkness, and you don't really get that kind of contrast of the light from the moon creating a bit of vibrance. There's whole periods where they're going through a barn and you can't really see anything. Now, that being said, when we get the Wolfman's views, when the transformation is occurring, which you know is going to happen from that blurb, that's kind of interesting, because as it's taking hold, you can see how he sees. Like, the faces started to distort slightly and lose a bit of their features. People's eyes glow. There's moments of establishing his sense of smell changing. Like, he can hear thumping coming from a room, and when he goes into it, that thumping is just a big spider crawling on the wall. Like, well, big for the UK, but, you know, not exactly a house spider, but not like a mutant spider, just like more like a tarantula sort of size crawling up the wall. Sense of smell is more heightened. The transformation is pretty short in terms of the typical werewolf transformation scene. And what I would say is, a little while ago, there was a release of Universal Halloween Horror Nights, and they had a new feature for the Wolfman, and someone was there. And it was kind of like, is this how they're releasing what the Wolfman is going to look like in Wolfman? Because if so, Jesus Christ. It didn't look great. It looked very much like something out of Wrong Turn. It doesn't look as bad in the film, but it doesn't look that dissimilar. Like, they're not hairy werewolves. And you could maybe argue that they're going for the more realistic transformation, perhaps. But it does feel like it's then sitting between that gap of, is this just a disease that's affecting a person to act more wolf-like, or is it definitely actually a lycanthropic disease, because like knuckle joints and claws and all this stuff is occurring. It does have the tragic story beats that you would expect from a Wolfman film. Like, the whole general werewolf mythos is one of tragedy for the most part. You get films like Silver Bullet where they take a slightly different approach, but it does go through the beats that you'd necessarily expect. For me, it isn't a bad film. It's just fairly empty, and it wasn't very memorable. There wasn't any particular moment in it where I thought, okay, that was a really cool scene. It's not uber gory. It's not massively violent. I mean, I'd say Nosferatu was more violent than this, and Nosferatu was a lot of building up tension and fear, and that's the approach it took with horror. But this doesn't really kind of go down that route. There's a lot of running back and forth between the house that they're in, and at points you do sort of go, okay, right, what else can we do? They leave the house, they run back to the house, leave the house, run back to the house. And maybe I'm veering into spoiler territory a bit here, but it's the route it kind of goes. And there's a bit of a twist near the end, but you can see the twist coming a mile away, I felt. I'm going to give Wolfman 5 out of 10. It wasn't bad, but I'm not going to rush to watch it again. 5 out of 10 for Wolfman. And that's going to bring us now to our little featured presentation, if my button works. Which I think it froze. I think it did freeze there. And I pressed the wrong button. There we go. We're going to a featured presentation. And I've dropped my drink lid. So initially I was kind of thinking, well, do I talk about what is wrong with modern Universal horror adaptations? I mean, maybe that could have been an idea. But I figured we haven't really done a werewolf episode. I don't think. Someone from the archives may correct me if I'm wrong here, but I don't feel that we have done a werewolf deep dive. And this isn't necessarily going to be a werewolf deep dive, but I kind of wanted to talk about where werewolves have been generally done well. Not always the best, but well to an extent. And we're going to start off with, of course, the daddy when it comes to the last 40 years now, actually, I suppose, of werewolf films. An American Werewolf in London. This is one of these films that for a long time I wasn't really that fussed with, because I always was just like, well, werewolves are kind of cool. I prefer vampires. And normally there's no happy ending with a werewolf film. And I don't always need a happy ending, but sometimes you want there to be a bit of respite. And especially if you have a film where the protagonist is likable and then they're going through hell and there's only really one resolution. It's always just a bit tragic, but I guess that's part of the whole werewolf mythos. American Werewolf in London, 1981 comedy horror written and directed by John Landis, starring David Norton, Jenny Agutter, Griffin Dunn, and John Woodvine. Now, what this film does well is we have a great werewolf attack very early on in the film. And we don't just have a werewolf attack and one person dies and one person lives, but they then basically utilize the ghost of the dead friend as like a bit of a conscious, and basically almost like the inner wolf talking to David. Just heard some weird sound outside. A little bit freaky. And that approach works really well in this, because as time is passing, Jack is deteriorating. He's becoming more like a zombie. And it's one of those rare occurrences with a werewolf film where we are seeing the psychological aspect of it. It's not just a case of, I've been bitten by a werewolf, now I'm turning into a werewolf. We're seeing how it's infecting his dreams, and how his mind is becoming more of the wolf than it is the man. That's just something that doesn't actually happen that often, and you'd almost think that there'd be more detractors of that would try and copy that approach, and maybe there are, but it was something very unique. And this is a film that is predominantly famous for the Rick Baker makeup on the werewolf transformation. For me, I don't think it's been done better. I know you might say A Company of Wolves, but I just think that this has got to be. It still is the best werewolf transformation in a film. End of. There is a contender though that I always enjoyed aspects of, but I don't think is actually a very good film overall, and that is The Howling. I think the werewolves in this, the transformation in this is pretty good. It isn't as good as American Werewolf in London. But that being said, I think when you actually see the werewolves, there's one particular moment where it's stalking a character in this like kind of classroom or medical room, where I think the werewolf itself is scarier. The design of the werewolf looks terrifying. Unfortunately, though, I don't think The Howling is that good of a film. And it's spawned a series which has just got worse and worse and worse. There's so many of them I've not seen. I've only seen maybe 2 or 3, and they were fucking awful. But we do have the special effects in this from Rob Bottin, who I believe also worked on The Thing. He worked on the Fog and the Thing, along with RoboCop. It's a standout in that regard. But in terms of the actual story, I mean, it's unique enough, having this retreat, but all the people in the retreat are werewolves. It's just... It just doesn't really connect the dots that well, and it doesn't work as well as it should. But it has some great effects in it. And it's got a really good cast. Dee Wallace, Patrick Macnee, Dennis Dugan, John Carradine, Christopher Stone, Slim Pickens, Robert Picardo. There's some good people in this. But the high point for me is the werewolf transformation and just the general werewolf appearance. I think probably one of my favourite looking werewolves. Just the height, it just looks menacing. Now, one of my overall favourite werewolf films, I haven't seen it for a while, so it may be that the effects in it look a bit more dated than back in the day, but in terms of werewolf story and performances, I think Ginger Snaps took such a unique approach at this. It's directed by John Fawcett, written by Karen Walton, starring Emily Perkins and Catherine Isabelle as 2 morbid teenage sisters, which are tested when Ginger, who has just started her period for the first time, is attacked and bitten by an unknown animal, which turns out to be a werewolf. So it's taken the approach of the changes that a woman goes through as they're developing, and putting the spin on it of the changes going through a person when they've been infected with the lycanthropic werewolf disease, and taking an approach of then trying to cure that and trying to get around that. I think with this, there's some really cool moments. I mean, the effects at the time, I do think it looked a little cheesy. In particular, there's one moment when she's going through the high school, when Ginger's going through the high school, and she's sort of mid-transformation, but she looks almost like a Catwoman, like it's like a Halloween like dress up. But then when she actually does become a full-on werewolf, it does get really violent later on. Ginger mutilating one character. There's a moment when Bridget is pleading with Ginger to let, I think it's Sam, go. And I can't remember exactly how she kills Sam, but it's almost like she was holding him against a wall and then just sort of pushes through his throat or something. I always remember that death being particularly shocking before basically Bridget trying to save the day, but in essence being infected. Now, this did lead to a sequel and a prequel. The prequel I don't really remember. I didn't think the prequel was that good, but the sequel is very good with an excellent ending. And I do think that is a unique way. I mean, the film's 25 years old now, but it was a unique way of looking at the werewolf curse by taking it to the teenage girl aspect, kind of like a proto Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but in a horror film, taking that approach on the transformation. Obviously, there's werewolves in Buffy, but that sort of thing. Really enjoyed this one. And then a film which I think we are going to have to do a watch along on soon because it is currently on Prime. Dog Soldiers. 2002. God damn. This is a 2002 British action horror film written, directed, and edited by Neil Marshall, starring Sean Pertwee, Kevin McKidd, Emma Cleansby, and Liam Cunningham. Again, it's a different approach where we're taking an action horror film approach, as opposed to just focusing on an individual who's going through the werewolf transformation, that tragedy. It's almost like the Aliens approach to Wolfman. We're taking away the isolation and the terror from the individual, and we're focusing on a group who are basically outgunned with creatures and isolated and being picked off one by one by these terrifying beings. Now, Dog Soldiers has some great moments in this, and it does this thing which Wolfman fails on in creating memorable moments. It's not just a case of, if you're doing a werewolf film, you have to have the transformation as the key. That does help, but particular set pieces that stand out will just elevate that film as a whole to one that you want to return to and you want to see what happens next. I haven't put the Dog Soldiers artwork on there. It's definitely one, if you haven't ever seen it, to give it a go. Again, it may look potentially a bit more dated these days, and it does also highlight that there is a real gulf in modern day werewolf films, and we are getting the next Robert Eggers film has been announced as a 13th century England set werewolf film, and I like Robert Eggers, so I have faith in that. But it does highlight that it has been such a long time since we've had really good standout werewolf films. There was one that I reviewed, I don't know if I reviewed, but we did a watch along of it a while ago, set in a small community where it seems as though there's a werewolf amongst the community. I can't remember the name of it now, but that was actually pretty good. But outside of that, we haven't really had a good werewolf film hit the mainstream for seemingly 20 years now, looking at this. And I think that may well be continuing, especially with my feelings on Wolfman. It just didn't quite hit the mark. It didn't quite nail the assignment. But if there is any werewolf films that you think, well, actually, this is stellar, this is one worth mentioning, hit up the socials. We're on X at Ministry_Horror, Ministry of Horror on Instagram, Ministry of Horror on Facebook, on TikTok, just Ministry of Horror, you'll find us. And as mentioned, we're focusing on really pushing the Twitch channel now. So if you haven't already, give the channel a follow. If you have Prime, consider using your free Prime sub on the channel. It really does help, and it really is going to help me with the wedding and the honeymoon. And we now are on Patreon, patreon.com/Ministry of Horror. If you can just become a free member, then that is great. It builds up the exposure for the channel. But if you do want to support the channel financially, we do have tiers. I will be updating those tiers with exactly the sort of things that you're going to get in their regularity going forwards. But that is also where the show is going to go for 48 hours exclusive before hitting YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and now we are on Amazon Music and I believe Audible. So we are finally getting around to branching out the exposure on podcast platforms for the show. Thank you very much for watching and listening, and also thank you again to the members, Gruff and Bericles. Thank you very much, guys. You get a shout out on the show. And that is it for another week of the Ministry of Horror. As mentioned, I think we're going to have to do a watch along of Dog Soldiers while it is on Prime, because that's a quality film. I've not seen it for a very long time. We're going to try and increase the regularity of doing the watch alongs. I'm going to aim to game twice a week on Twitch. I'll look to kind of confirm what is a good day. Maybe for the time being, as and when, a bit ad hoc. But at some point, I would like to set up a schedule that I will then stick to for doing a game stream for a couple of hours a night, twice a week. And then, yeah, we'll do watch-alongs. We'll have loads of new cool content. Thank you very much, Ghouls and Fiends, for watching and listening. I'll catch you guys later. Goodbye.